Buried in the most visited national park in America are lights that keep perfect time, forests dying faster than any model predicted, and a sound that rolls through the backcountry with no source anyone can name. Most people photograph one fogged-over overlook and think they've seen the Smokies. They've seen the postcard. And by the time we reach number 1, you'll understand why one of these places still makes a noise that no scientist has ever managed to explain. Number 22. The blue smoke isn't smoke. The thing this entire park is named for is something we still can't fully predict. The Cherokee called this range Shakonage, place of blue smoke, long before a tourism board ever printed the phrase. Picture standing at an overlook at dawn, watching that blue haze pool in every valley below you like water. It isn't smoke, and it isn't fog in the way you'd think. Most of it comes from the forest breathing. The trees release enormous volumes of volatile organic compounds, terpenes, and similar molecules, which react in sunlight, form tiny particles, and scatter light toward blue. That's the broad outline. But the fine detail stays open, exactly how temperature, humidity, plant chemistry, and particle size combine to produce the specific shade on a specific afternoon over a specific ridge is something scientists still model, rather than close. And modern pollution drifting in from outside tangles the natural signal further, changing the mix in ways researchers are still separating out. Think about that. The single most photographed feature of America's busiest national park is a blue haze we've named, branded, and sold on postcards, and still can't fully predict from one afternoon to the next. Number 21, fireflies that blink together. There's a hillside in this park where the light show runs on a clock nobody set. Deep in what used to be Elkmont, a logging town swallowed by the park a century ago, thousands of fireflies blink in perfect unison for about 2 weeks every June. The species is Photinus carolinus, one of only a handful of synchronous fireflies in the Western Hemisphere. Imagine standing on that slope in the dark. The whole hillside pulses together, goes black, waits, and pulses again, like the forest is breathing in code. The rhythm is so precise that early observers assumed they were imagining it. The display draws such crowds that the Park Service now runs a lottery just to let people in, so you apply months ahead for the privilege of standing in the pitch black. Researchers have solid theories for why the males coordinate, mating efficiency, cutting through competing signals, giving females a cleaner target. But the exact trigger for that mass synchronization still isn't fully pinned down. There's no lead firefly, no conductor, no cue that starts the whole hill at once. They just find the beat. So here's the situation, more or less. The federal government built a permit system, a shuttle operation, and an annual lottery around a natural event we can't completely explain. Number 20, the forest that died too fast. At the highest point in Tennessee, a dead forest is waiting for you at the top. Clingman's Dome sits at 6,643 feet, high enough that the ecosystem up there isn't really southern Appalachian at all. It's a boreal relict, a pocket of northern spruce fir stranded by the last ice age and never allowed to come down off the peaks. It's a piece of Canada left behind on a Tennessee mountaintop. Look around up there now, and the Fraser firs that define it stand as bare gray skeletons across whole slopes, thousands of dead trunks going silver in the fog. The killer is partly a tiny invasive insect, the balsam woolly adelgid, which attacks mature firs with almost nothing to check it here, and partly acid deposition, fog that has soaked these summits at acidity levels you would expect over heavy industry. What unsettled the scientists watching wasn't that the firs died. It was how fast and how completely they went, in patterns that outran the models built to predict the decline. You take the paved half-mile up to the tower expecting the green crown of the south. Instead, you get gray poles, low cloud moving through them, and a summit that looks 1,000 miles too far north. Number 19. A garden no one planted. There's a flower garden on top of a smoky mountain that nobody planted and nobody can fully explain. Gregory Bald is a broad grassy dome near the crest of the range, open and treeless where dense forest should win every time. The hike is miles uphill, which keeps the crowds thin. Now picture reaching the top in June and finding the whole bald erupting with wild flame azaleas in colors that have no business appearing together in the wild orange, salmon, pink, scarlet, cream, sometimes several shades on a single shrub. These are natural hybrids, cross-pollinated across generations with no human hand behind them. But the deeper puzzle isn't the flowers, it's the bald itself. Nobody agrees on why these open meadows exist this high in a range that grows trees on almost everything else. The competing explanations run from ancient climate shifts to centuries of grazing to old fire regimes. And the argument has run among researchers for decades without a clean verdict. The Park Service now has to mow some balds by hand just to stop the forest from erasing them, which is its own quiet admission. A garden sitting on top of an unsolved question with no gardener and no agreed reason to be there. The overlooks, the summits, the balds, those you can almost explain away. Almost. But the mountains are about to start hiding things underground. And the deeper we go, the less certain anyone gets. Number 18. A page no one can read. Just off the park's southern edge, in the Cherokee homeland that borders it, lies a slab of stone covered in writing nobody alive can read. This ground is the heart of the eastern band of Cherokee, in the mountains that run right up to the park boundary. And here sits Juticula Rock, its surface carrying hundreds of separate carvings, swirls, lines, and figures pecked into the soapstone, across a span nobody can precisely date. The Cherokee Tayat-Tsul'kalu', a giant of the old stories, said to have left his mark on the rock as he crossed the land. Kneel down next to it and run your eyes across the surface. It's one of the most densely carved petroglyph stones in the eastern United States, and most people drive right past the turnoff. Here's the part that lingers. Nobody has produced a confident reading of what the carvings mean. Archaeologists have mapped and studied them for years, but the meaning was never recorded anywhere except the stone itself, and the people who carved it left no key. So you stand over a slab knowing every mark was a deliberate choice, knowing it meant something exact to someone, and knowing the answer went into the ground with the hands that made it. A full page of careful writing in a language with no alphabet left to crack it. Number 17. The town nobody could bury. There's a ghost town in the middle of this wilderness that the park spent a century unable to make up its mind about. After the loggers stripped the valley around Elkmont and moved on, the wealthy of Knoxville turned it into a summer retreat. The Appalachian Club, the Wonderland Park Hotel, rows of vacation cottages strung along the river. When the new park absorbed the land, families held on through lifetime leases that dragged on for decades. So the buildings kept aging in place, while the Park Service argued with itself. Preserve them as history? Tear them down and let the forest reclaim the ground? In the end, both happened. Some cottages were restored, others flattened, and the reasoning behind which building got saved and which got a bulldozer was never especially clean. Walk it today and you pass standing stone chimneys, sagging porches, and empty doorways opening onto rhododendron. Here's the strange overlap. The famous fireflies blink through these same ruins every June, which means the crowds come for the insects and walk straight past the town without a glance. A settlement that survived not by decision, but by decades of nobody able to decide. Number 16. Lights on the ridgeline. For generations, people across these mountains have watched lights they can't account for. This is a wider southern Appalachian pattern, reported up and down the range, and its most famous case sits to the east of the Smokies in the Blue Ridge, the Brown Mountain Lights, documented enough that the U.S. Geological Survey actually investigated them more than once. Pale lights that appear at night along certain ridges, drifting, sometimes splitting, sometimes vanishing when approached. The explanations offered over the years have ranged from distant train and car headlights refracting through humid air to swamp gas to plain misidentification. And some hold up in some cases. None has fully closed the file, partly because people reported the lights before the cars and trains that supposedly caused them. The point isn't that ghosts are real. It's that families who've lived in these hollows their whole lives keep reporting the same thing in the same places, generation after generation, and the confident debunkings keep coming up, one detail short. It's the gap between the legend and the logbook that keeps this one alive. Number 15. Rivers that disappear underground. There's a valley here where the rivers vanish into the ground and don't fully explain themselves on the way back out. Cades Cove is the most visited spot in the entire park, an 11-mile loop of open pasture ringed by peaks, and almost nobody driving it realizes they're sitting on the strangest geology in the range. The mountains around the cove are ancient, hard, weather-resistant rock. The floor of the cove is limestone, softer, riddled with the cracks and voids that water loves. Think about how backwards that is, a window of soluble rock sitting in the middle of a range built from the opposite. And limestone does what limestone does. Streams here disappear into sinkholes, run through cave passages beneath the pasture, and resurface somewhere else. And the full plumbing of where water enters and comes back out has never been completely mapped. Cavers and geologists have traced parts of it stay dark. So the prettiest, most photographed loop in the Smokies, the one with the deer and the cabins and the traffic jams, is floating on a hidden system of water that keeps most of its route to itself. We're past the easy half of the map now. Blue haze, dying summits, vanishing rivers, but everything so far still has a shape you can picture. What's coming lives under the leaf litter, inside the timeline, and out past the last road. And it only gets stranger as we count down. Number 14. The salamander capital of Earth. The strangest population in this park is hiding right under your boots. The Great Smoky Mountains hold one of the densest concentrations of salamander species on Earth. Roughly 30 of them packed into these ridges and streams, so many that biologists genuinely call this range the salamander capital of the world. Most belong to a family that does something almost unbelievable. They have no lungs at all and breathe entirely through their skin, which is why they need this cool, permanently damp forest and can't live just anywhere. Some species here exist on a single mountain and nowhere else on the planet, having diverged in isolation on one particular slope. There are also hellbenders in the larger streams, giant aquatic salamanders that push past 2 feet long and look like something left over from an earlier world. What researchers are still working out is exactly how so many closely related species split apart and stayed separate across such a compact area. Picture walking a rainy trail here and seeing nothing at all. Underneath you, in the wet leaves and streambeds, is a rainforest's worth of amphibians and a puzzle biology hasn't finished solving. Number 13. The Loop, built on loss. The most peaceful view in the park is also a record of who was forced out to create it. Cades Cove looks, at a glance, like a preserved slice of frontier Appalachia, split rail fences, weathered log churches, cabins, a working grist mill, all standing along the loop. What the postcards leave out is that this was a living community. Hundreds of people. Farms worked for well over a century until the land was taken to assemble the national park in the early 20th century. The buildings were preserved. The people were not permitted to stay. Some fought it, some took lifetime leases and watched the place become a tourist drive around them. and their churches now hold cemeteries of families who were moved off the very land their relatives are buried in. Look at the visitors photographing those cabins as scenery, mostly not registering that they're photographing an eviction. This is the emotional core of the whole park, the part the brochure carefully doesn't dwell on. The prettiest loop in the Smokies is also its longest memory of who had to leave so the rest of us could pull over and take the picture. Number 12. The forest the saws missed. Almost the entire park was clear-cut, which makes what survived nearly impossible to believe. In the early 20th century, logging companies stripped the Smokies at industrial scale, whole watersheds shaved down, railroads run up the hollows to haul the timber out. And yet, in a handful of remote coves too steep or too far up to reach profitably, the original forest was simply never taken. Albright Grove, reached by a narrow loop off a longer trail, is one of the finest surviving pieces of it. Walk in and the scale rearranges your sense of the East entirely. Tulip poplars with trunks past 20 feet around, hemlocks and silver bells towering into a canopy that has never been cut, a forest floor of downed giants slowly returning to soil. This is one of the largest tracts of old growth left in the eastern United States, a genuine remnant of what the whole region looked like before the saws. Exactly why these specific pockets slipped through when the machinery came for everything around them isn't cleanly documented. Access, terrain, timing, luck, all tangled together. A near primeval forest that has no business still standing this far east, a few miles off a road most people drive right past. Number 11. The cold that shouldn't exist. Some places in these mountains stay near freezing in the dead heat of August, and nobody can fully say why one holds its cold and the next doesn't. Across the Smokies and the ridges around them, there are jumbles of collapsed boulders, the ice caves and blowing rock fissures, where cold air pours up out of the depths and pockets of the maze. Keep that chill deep into summer. Imagine standing sweating at the mouth of one and feeling it roll over you from inside the rock. The broad idea is that cold, dense air settles into the lower voids of these talus fields in winter and drains out slowly through the warm months. But that doesn't close the case, because the behavior varies wildly and unpredictably from one formation to the next, some holding ice well into July, while a nearly identical jumble a ridge over holds none at all. And pinning down exactly which conditions decide it is still messy work. Then there's the human strangeness layered on top, that people found these spots long before refrigeration. A reliably cold place in the dead heat of a southern summer, tucked inside a mountain with no fire and no explanation they could have had. Nature built a cold room in the rock and never told anyone the rule for which rooms it keeps. 2/3 of the way down now, and notice the shift. The early discoveries were things you could see and photograph. What's left is older, deeper, and harder to hold, until the last one, which you can only hear. Number 10. Coffins carved from stone. In the river valleys that flank these mountains, an entire civilization buried its dead in coffins made of rock. Across the southern Appalachian River country, just west of the Smokies, the Mississippian people built what archaeologists call stone box graves, lining the sides and floor with flat limestone slabs and sealing the body beneath a stone lid. Picture a fitted container of solid rock, built for a single human being. Enormous numbers have been documented. Whole cemeteries of slab boxes clustered across the flat ground near the water. And here's the detail that stays with you. The boxes hold adults and infants alike, and the smallest graves, built for children, were made with the same fitted limestone and the same patience as the largest. This wasn't rushed or careless work. It was a deep tradition, kept alive across many generations, in burial grounds far older than any county line now drawn carelessly over them. The high country gets all the attention. The valleys wrapping around it were sealing their dead in stone the whole time, and almost nobody who visits the region ever hears about it. Number 9. A rainforest in the south. The Smokies pull off a contradiction almost nowhere else in the country can manage. This is, by the numbers, one of the wettest places in the eastern United States, with the high peaks catching enough precipitation each year to qualify as temperate rainforest, while sitting in the humid American South. Think about that combination: southern latitude, near rainforest rainfall, and near boreal cold at elevation, all stacked in one mountain range. That's exactly why the park is so staggeringly alive, one of the most biodiverse, temperate protected areas on the planet. Scientists launched a years-long effort to inventory every living thing inside the boundary, expecting to fill in gaps. Instead, they keep finding species entirely new to science. Insects, fungi, tiny organisms nobody had ever named. Picture that. In a park visited by 12 million people a year, in a country mapped down to the parking lot, there are living things in these mountains that still don't have a name. The most crowded park in America is also, biologically, one of the least finished places in it. Number 8. Tools beside the mammoths. Now the floor drops out from under the timeline. Just beyond these mountains, at the northeastern end of the same Appalachian system, a place called Saltville in southwest Virginia holds an ancient salt marsh that trapped and preserved the deep past in its mud. What has come out of that mud stretches how long we know people have been in this range. Ice Age animal bones, including mammoth and other now vanished species. And, in association with them, evidence interpreted by researchers as stone tools and butchered bone, pointing to a human presence at the very end of the last ice age, with some findings argued to reach back many thousands of years. The dating and interpretation at sites this old are genuinely debated among archaeologists, and the case isn't airtight. But sit with the possibility: human beings standing in these same mountains while mammoths still breathed and the glaciers were still grinding north. In the range people now cross in an afternoon on a paved road. Everything else on this list is recent by comparison. This is the deep end of the timeline, and the water down here is very dark. Number 7. The fish that vanished. The strangest disappearances in these mountains didn't happen in the forest. They happened in the water. The southern Appalachian streams and springs evolved fish, crayfish, mussels, and snails found nowhere else, isolated in single drainages for so long that each valley became its own private aquarium. The freshwater mussel diversity of this region was once among the richest on Earth. Here's the hard part. A number of these species have slipped toward extinction or vanished entirely inside the last century. Some documented, some presumably lost before anyone described them at all. Imagine a biologist wading a creek where a species was recorded a few decades ago and simply not finding it anymore, then not finding it the next year or ever again. The mystery here isn't eerie, it's sharper than that. In one of the best studied wild regions in the country, life that took millions of years to become unique disappeared so quietly that in some cases we're not fully sure what we had before it went. The rivers kept their secrets and then took a few of them for good. 3 left. This is where even the careful scientists run low on answers, because the closer we get to number 1, the more the honest response becomes a shrug, until at the very bottom, there's no explanation on file at all. Number 6. The meadows that refuse trees. That question about the balds we brushed past earlier may be the single most argued over landscape in the southern Appalachians, and it earns a second look this deep in the list. Scattered along the high crest are grassy balds, wide open meadows sitting on peaks warm enough and wet enough that they should be closed forest, thick with trees. Instead, they're bare and grassy, and have apparently been that way for a very long time. Look around one. And here's the problem staring back at you. These aren't above the tree line. Trees grow fine hundreds of feet higher on nearby slopes. So why do the balds stay open? Researchers have proposed grazing by Ice Age megafauna, later grazing by elk and livestock, ancient fires, native land management, climate quirks, and combinations of all of them. And after generations of study, there's still no settled answer. Left alone, many slowly grow over, which suggests something was keeping them clear that no longer is. A meadow on a mountaintop that shouldn't exist, held open by a hand we can no longer identify. Number 5. Weather born on the ridge. This range builds weather so local and so sudden that the forecast simply can't keep up with it. Warm, moist air shoves up against the high wall of the mountains, cools as it climbs, and dumps rain, fog, and temperature crashes with very little warning. Picture a clear, mild trailhead that puts you into cold, blinding cloud a couple thousand feet up in under an hour. That broad mechanism is clear enough. What isn't is how extreme and how fine-grained it gets. Individual coves running their own microclimates that don't fully reduce to the regional forecast. One hollow soaked while the next stays dry, fog banks forming and dissolving on a single ridge for reasons the models smear over. The terrain carves the atmosphere into pockets too small and too strange for the prediction to catch. Old-timers here learned to read the mountain by watching where the haze gathers, because the official forecast stops working at this scale. It's a range steep enough to argue with the sky and win. And it doesn't always warn you before it does. Number 4. Life science can't name. That inventory of the park hides one of the strangest facts on this entire list. When scientists set out to catalog every living thing inside the boundary, they expected to fill in gaps. What they didn't expect was the sheer volume of the unknown. The project has turned up many hundreds of species entirely new to science, and many thousands more never before recorded inside the park. And the count keeps climbing. Every time specialists look harder at the fungi, the insects, the microscopic life in the soil and streams, they find more that no one has ever described. Estimates of how many species actually live inside the boundary run to tens of thousands beyond what's currently cataloged. Sit with what that means. This is not a remote jungle. It's a park with visitor centers, gift shops, and a paved road over the crest. And it holds a scale of unnamed life that rivals genuinely unexplored corners of the planet. We built parking lots on top of an ecosystem we still haven't finished discovering. Number 3. The elk that came back. This next mystery watches you back. Stand at the edge of a field in Cataloochee Valley at dusk, and you may hear a sound that hadn't crossed these mountains in well over a century. The bugle of a wild elk. Elk once ranged across this region and were hunted out of the southern Appalachians completely. Gone for generations, a piece of the ecosystem simply erased. Then, a couple of decades ago, wildlife managers released a small experimental herd back into the park, and against long odds, the animals held on and began to breed. Picture a bull elk stepping out of the tree line into that quiet valley. Hundreds of pounds of an animal these mountains had forgotten. What researchers are still watching is the harder question, whether a landscape that spent a century without its largest grazer can truly reabsorb it. How the forest, the balds, and the other wildlife shift around a returning giant. It's a rare thing, a piece of a vanished ecosystem reassembling itself in real time. The mountains lost something enormous, and then, cautiously, started getting it back. Number 2. The storm trapped in stone. The rock beneath your feet here holds a record, almost too old to picture. The Great Smoky Mountains are among the oldest mountains on Earth, and the stone that makes them was laid down long before the range ever rose, in ancient seas and river systems hundreds of millions of years ago. Look closely at exposed rock in the right places, and you can read that vanished world directly. ripple marks from a shoreline that dried up before complex life crawled onto land. Mud cracks, the frozen texture of a seafloor. Geologists use these preserved surfaces to reconstruct environments that existed before there were trees, before there were bones, before almost anything you'd recognize as alive. Think about running your hand across a ripple mark set by a tide that went out 750 million years ago. What still gets debated is the full story of how these ancient rocks were stacked, folded, and shoved into place to build the range we walk today. A slow-motion collision preserved in stone. You're not standing on a mountain. You're standing on the pressed flat memory of a world that ended before the dinosaurs began. Number 1. The sound with no source. The strangest thing in these mountains is one you can't see, can't photograph, and can't chase down. You can only hear it. Deep in the interior, miles from any road, where the park stops being a scenic drive and becomes real wilderness, hikers, rangers, and old mountain residents have reported low booming and rumbling sounds with no clear origin. Not thunder, not obviously anything. Picture a still, clear day, no plane overhead, and a deep concussion rolling through the ridges, felt in your chest as much as heard, and then gone. Some of these can be explained: distant blasting, aircraft, small seismic events, rockfall in terrain no one's watching. But the reports keep including ones that don't fit any of that, described by experienced people who know exactly what a jet or a landslide sounds like, and are telling you this was something else. Booming sounds like these have been reported in mountains and near water around the world for centuries. And in many cases, there's still no single confirmed mechanism on file. No official phenomenon, no plaque, just a documented pattern of a sound the deep park makes, and no one has ever fully signed off on why. It's the cleanest possible ending for these mountains, because it's the thing that best describes all of them. A wilderness that is still, quietly, making a noise we can't account for. The Smokies most people reduce to one fogged-over overlook are, underneath, one of the least finished places in the country, full of life we haven't named, landscapes we can't explain, and at least one sound nobody can source. So tell me in the comments about the one near you, the trail, the cove, the stretch of woods where something happens that nobody can quite explain. Because those are the ones we're hunting next. The next investigation is already waiting for you right there on screen.